In this video, I'm going to talk about how to do a circular cast on, suitable for shawls and blankets that are worked in the round from the center out. You can also use it as the cast on for a swirly toe or a circular toe on toe-up socks. So this is my book, Beaded Lace Knitting. This is a rather battered copy of it that lives in my workshop bags. It's a bit battered. But in this book, I have two circular cast-ons. So I got the Emily Ocker cast-on, which uses a crochet hook. And that's the result. And then I got the Disappearing Loop cast-on, which is what I'm going to show you today, which uses just a knitting needle. So I'm going to just, this is what it looks like. I don't actually have a swatch knitted up, but that's what it looks like. Let me see if I can turn that around. All right, let's see if I can turn that around. There we go. That's what it looks like. So it gives you a really neat circular cast on for anything that's knitted from the center out. Whether it's a circular shawl, a square shawl, anything like that, hexagon shawl, anything like that, you can use this cast on for. So I'm going to show you how to do the Disappearing Loop cast on in this video. Now you can do the Disappearing Loop cast on using either a circular needle and the magic loop technique, or double pointed needles, and which I've done in the book. I'm going to actually show you how to do it using the double pointed needles first, and then I'll show you using the circular needles and magic loop. So depending on what shape you're going to cast on for, I'm going to assume that this will be a square. So I'm going to use 5 double pointed needles, so 4 to divide the stitches onto, and then 1 needle to knit with. These are the square needles by Knit Pro, square wooden needles by Knit Pro. I rarely actually knit with circular needles anymore. I tend to use magic loop and circular needles. But I'm going to show you using double pointed needles first, and then I'll show you doing magic loop. So you want to hold the working yarn in your left hand, so the ball end of the yarn in your left hand and the tail in your right hand. So tail's in your right hand, the ball end is in your left hand. And then you're basically going to make a loop. So if you just leave a bit of a tail and then take the tail end and just make a loop like that, so that the tail end kind of crosses up on top of the working yarn end. Okay, like that. And then you want to pinch that with your hand. Now I'm going to show this holding the yarn in my left hand because that's how I knit continental style. It may work with holding the yarn in your right hand. I haven't tried it because I'm not very good at that. So I'm going to show you holding the yarn in my left hand, but try it with your right hand if you're an English style knitter, unless you can hold the yarn in your left hand just for this. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you can take 1 needle, you're going to take it under the working yarn. So you can see I'm still holding on to that. Under the working yarn. So I'm going to hold it, so I've taken the needle under the working yarn. I'm also holding the needle and that loop in my right hand. So I just take the needle under the working yarn, so the yarn goes across the needle from front to back. And then I'm going to go through this loop, so just right through the middle, still holding on to it. Then I'm going to take the yarn over from front to back and pull it back through to the front. Okay, so I've now got 2 stitches. So I'm going to go over like that, go through the loop, and then take the yarn over again, and then bring the needle back through to the front of the loop. So I've now got 4 stitches. So each time you do this, you cast on 2 stitches. So we're going to go the yarn over like that, the yarn goes from front to back, then in through the loop, and then take the yarn over again and bring the yarn back through to the front of the loop. Now we've got 6 stitches, so I'm going to do 2 more. Yarn over, in through the loop, yarn over, back through to the front of the loop. So I've now got 8 stitches, which is what I want. And then I'm going to just pull the tail to tighten that loop a little bit, because you don't want that to be too big. So you can now, what I tend to do is divide these stitches onto 2 needles before I start knitting. It's you can divide them onto 4, but I just find that a little bit too difficult to manage. So I'm going to just do 4 stitches on each needle. So I've now got 4 stitches on the top needle and 4 stitches on the bottom needle. And then I'm going to make sure I'm holding it so that the working yarn, so I'm just going to hold the tail out of the way, the working yarn is coming from the needle that's at the bottom. So that needle, that's where the working yarn is, because I'm going to join to work in the round. So if I started knitting from that needle, I'd be knitting backwards and I'd get a gap here. So I'm going to start knitting with that top needle so I can join working in the round, because the yarn is coming from here on the bottom needle. So I want to join this to work in the round. So like I said, I knit continental style. This doesn't matter if you knit English style, this is fine. So I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches onto, so I'm holding both sets of needles, by the way, just to keep them under control. I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches, push this onto the center of the needle. This is how I tend to hold my needles when I do double pointed needles. Okay, so then I'm going to do the next 2 onto a second double pointed needle. Okay, and then I'm going to do, hang on, I got one there. I'm going to do the next 2 onto a third double pointed needle. There we go, and then final needle onto the final double pointed needle. So even though I've got the stitches on 4 needles now, I haven't actually knitted the last one, so you've got to make sure you remember to knit that last needle as well. There we go. Okay. Now at this point, I would try and not put the needles down at this point. I would try and do a few more rounds, because it can be a little bit, if you put it down, it can be a little bit difficult to kind of get back to starting again. So that's what it looks like at this point. But it is a little bit awkward. So I'm now going to pretend that this is going to be a square shawl or square blanket. So I've got 8 stitches and I've knitted 1 round. So I'm now going to use yarn overs to shape this blanket, or shawl. So I can do a yarn over like that. So if you knit the English style, you just do the yarn over like you normally do. Yarn over, knit 1. So I'm basically just going to do yarn over, knit 1 all the way around. But start the needle with the yarn over. You don't want to end the needle with the yarn over. So yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. And then change needles. Careful with double point needles, that when you pull one out to knit with, that you pull out an empty needle and not needle with stitches on. So I'm going to knit, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. Oops. And then yarn over, knit 1. You do feel a little bit like you've got needles going everywhere at this point, and that's fine. You can divide the stitches onto 3 needles if you prefer. Especially if it's going to be a square, I find 4 needles easier, because then I can have a quarter on each needle and it just divides quite easily. Okay, so now I'm back to the beginning, because I've now got 4 stitches on each needle. So I'm then going to do just a plain knit round. Now you can do a marker to mark the beginning of the round. You'd have to use a marker that actually fixes into the fabric rather than goes on your needle, because it would just fall off. I don't really think I need that at the moment, because I can tell when I get to the beginning of the round. So for example, this needle, I can tell that I haven't knitted the yarn overs yet. So there, and then when I get to the end of this round, I'll be able to tell when I start the first needle, because the yarn overs will have been knitted, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to knit this around quickly. If you prefer magic loop, I'll show you that in a minute. I prefer using magic loop for most things these days. I'm not quite actually sure whether this is easier on magic loop or double pointed needles. I think it's probably a bit easier on double pointed needles, unless you're fairly experienced with magic loop. If you're new to magic loop, then it's probably a little bit tricky. Okay, so that's back to the beginning of the round. So I'm now going to do yarn over, knit 3, 3, yarn over, knit 1. So the knit 1 is like a spine stitch. Let me just pull out some more yarn. And then each needle is the same. So yarn over, knit 3, 2, 3, yarn over, knit 1. Yarn over, knit 3, 3, yarn over, knit 1. Oops. Yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1. So I can now tell that I'm back at beginning because I got the needle with more stitches there. And I can also tell because the first stitch is a yarn over that hasn't been knitted yet. So I'm now on my plain knit round. So I'm going to just knit this round and then I'll do one more round and show you. Okay, I had to actually cut a section out because my dog started barking really loudly. So I'm hoping he's settled down again now. So now I'm on the next round. Now don't worry that that hole is looking big. I'll show you how to close that up in a minute. But I'm just going to do one more round and then I'll show you how to do that. So the next round is yarn over, then I'm going to knit 5. So remember last 2 rounds ago we did knit 3 between the yarn overs. Now we're going to do knit 5, yarn over, knit 1. So yarn over, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, yarn over, knit 1, and then yarn over, knit 5, 5, yarn over, knit 1, and I think I've got one more needle left to do. Yarn over, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yarn over, knit 1. So I think that's it. Yeah. Okay, so let me just show you. So that loop hole in the middle looks quite big now. All you need to do is grab your tail and let me just show you from there and just pull it, and you can see how it makes that hole really small and snug. So I don't normally weave in the end till I get to the end of the whatever I'm knitting. So but as you're knitting, that hole may become a little bit bigger. Let's see if I can make it a bit bigger again, but you just pull that when you finish the shawl or blanket and you want to weave in the end, you just pull that to tighten it, and then you just weave it in at the back. And once you've woven in the yarn, it won't get bigger again, it'll stay that small, but it's really nice and neat. So let me show you now how I do that using circular needle and the magic loop. So let me just get my circular needles. Okay, so we're starting the same. Working yarn, tail, so tail in your right hand, working ball end of the yarn in your tail in your right hand, ball end in your left hand. Leave a bit of a tail on the ball, leave a bit of a tail, and then just hold the yarn by that much far apart and make a little loop. Hang on. Make sure you cross the tail end over the ball end like that. Can you see that? Okay, and then hold just one of your needle tips, and you want to start by taking the needle under the working yarn so the yarn goes from front across to the back, and then go if you have this loop too big, it can get a little bit difficult, but also if you have it too small, it's difficult to get your needle through. So and it also depends on how you hold the needle. I tend to hold my needle quite close to the needle tip. If you hold the needle further back here, which a lot of English style knitters tend to do, then you will need probably need a long, bigger loop to get your needle through comfortably. So I've got the yarn over my needle to start with, in through the loop, yarn over the needle, and then bring it back through to the front. Then I've got 2 stitches. Yarn over, in through the loop, back through the front, yarn over, in through the loop, yarn over the needle, and then back through to the front. 2, 4, 6, yarn over, in through the loop, yarn over, back through to the front. I had to cut out a section there again because my dog started barking again. He's waiting for the postman, so I put him in the kitchen now. Okay, so I tend to hold on to that loop with my thumb and my middle finger just to make it easier to get my needle through. So I'm now cast on 2, 4, 6, 8. So again, I can just pull that tail to make that loop a little bit smaller. It doesn't really matter how small you make it. You don't want to pull it like completely tight, but just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to slide the stitches onto the cable needle, cable part of the needle, and then I'm going to find the middle. So 2, 4, bend my needle and pull a bit of a cable out. Okay, so now again you've got to make sure that you're working yarn is coming from the cable. So I'm pushing the stitches where the working yarn is onto my needle tip, and I'm leaving the stitches where the So I'm pushing the stitches where the tail is onto my needle tip, and the stitches with the working yarn, I'm leaving those on the cable. Okay, so stitches with the working yarn stay on the cable, the stitches with the tail go on the empty needle tip. So now I'm going to use the other needle tip to knit with. So my working yarn is coming from the stitch that's on the cable here. So I'm joining to work in the round again. So again, like I did before, I'm just going to knit one round to start with. So that's 4 stitches. And now you can pull that tail a bit to make the loop a bit smaller. So I've knitted those 4 stitches. Now I tend to pinch those stitches there, then move them around to my left hand. Oops. Then I'm going to pull the cable for the top stitches, push those 4 stitches that I haven't knitted yet onto the needle tip. So now the working yarn is coming from the stitch that's on my bottom needle, on this needle, and that's the needle I'm going to pull forward. Hang on, I haven't tightened my needles properly. There we go. And around to knit with. So again, the working yarn is coming from the stitch that's on the cable when I'm ready to start knitting. So I'm going to just knit 2, 3, 4. Okay. So now I've knitted a complete round, and I can just pull the tail a bit close there to close that up. So now I'm going to flick my needles around. So pull the cable. I'm holding on to the bottom stitches on the needle tip as I'm doing this. Push the cable, push the needle tip back. So the stitches I'm about to knit next are on the needle tip, and then the stitches where the working yarn is coming from, they're the stitches I've just knitted. So they can be, I'll slide those onto the cable. So I'm just going to do one round because the shaping is the same as before. So we're going to do the first round, it's just going to be yarn over, knit 1 all the way around. Knit 1. So start each needle with a yarn over and end each needle with a knit 1. So it's just yarn over, knit 1. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 stitches on that needle. Pull that cable, slide the stitches onto the needle tip. Pull the bottom needle tip forward and around. Yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. Yarn over, knit 1. So you don't want to end a needle with a yarn over because that means that you haven't got, it's just basically loose like that, and then while you fiddling around with changing your needles around, that yarn over will just disappear. So if you start with a yarn over, then that means you can end with a knit 1. So I'm now going to, now when you're using magic loop technique, you may wish to do to use markers to divide your stitches into 4 sections. I haven't actually got my markers with me at the moment, so I'm going to just do this without markers. But you may want to use markers to divide your stitches into 4 sections. So I'll show you on the next round where I would put the markers. I'm just going to do one plain round now. And then I'll tell you where I would put the markers. And I'll do one more round. Right, there we go. So you may want to mark it to mark the beginning of the round. If you do, then rather than having a marker that would just sort of slide around on the cable, I would actually get a padlock marker or like a removable locking stitch marker and put it into the fabric. Okay, so yarn over, this time is yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1. So that's the first quarter. So if I was using markers, that's where I would put a marker. And if I was going to turn this into a blanket or a shawl, if I was actually, this was the start of a project, I would put markers on. But because this is just a sample, I didn't actually pick up my markers. So I'm not going to put them in. But this is where you put the first marker. Yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1. That's the first quarter. Yarn over, knit 3, 1, 2, 3, yarn over, knit 1. So that's the second quarter. Now, because we're at the end of the needle, you don't need a marker, but you can put a marker on here if you want to. As the shawl gets bigger, it will, or blanket gets bigger, it will fill the needle eventually. So at that point, you would need marker. I would put a marker after each quarter, just because it makes it easier to work out where you are. So I'm going to swap my needles around. Yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1. So that would be my third marker, because that's my third quarter. Then yarn over, knit 3, yarn over, knit 1. And that's my final quarter. So let me just show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to slide all the stitches onto the cable. I'm using Chow-Goo, which normally I love, but the cables are a little bit stiff probably for this particular purpose. So I'm just going to pull that tight. So now you can see that's what that looks like. It doesn't look quite like a square yet, but as it grows, it will look more like a square. What I normally do is I quite often start on double point needles, and then as it gets a bit bigger and it gets too big for my double point needles, I then change it onto circular needles. Okay, so if you have any questions, please ask. As I said at the beginning, if you have my book, Beaded Lace Knitting, you will have pictures in there as well showing you how to do it. So it's called a disappearing loop cast on, and you'll have pictures here. I put the link to the video for how to do the Emily Ocker cast on, which it's basically the same, but it uses a crochet hook. So you may or may not find it easier, depending on how good you are at crochet. But I'll put the link to that below this video, so you can have a look at both if you want to. If you're interested in this book, it's still available from my website. You can order a signed copy. You can still get it on Amazon and probably other booksellers as well. And it's called Beaded Lace Knitting, and it's full of beaded shawl patterns. And there's a couple of garments, a couple of scarves. There's a cowl. There's a cardigan, there's a pair of hand warmers, and there's a big square shawl where you can practice these techniques. So let me just show you the picture of that before I go. So that's the big square shawl, which you can also make as a blanket if you use a slightly thicker yarn, because it is quite big. So you could easily turn that into a blanket just by using a thicker yarn. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please just ask and I'll do my best to answer.